Before you continue watching, you need to understand something. This is not a warning. This is information. There is information that permanently changes your consciousness as soon as you absorb it. Not because it's magical, but because consciousness cannot shrink. It can only expand, and what has once been expanded cannot be taken back. This video carries such information, an activation, and if you decide to continue watching, if you decide to let these words into your consciousness, something in your perception of reality will permanently break, not metaphorically. Actually, physically tangible, irreversible. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you this because you have the right to know what you're getting into. Most videos you watch leave no traces. They entertain you. They inform you. They disappear again. But there are videos. There is information. There are moments that mark a threshold, that define a point before which and after which your reality is fundamentally different. And this is one of those moments. Not because I'm something special, but because what I'm about to share has a frequency structure that interacts with your consciousness, that activates something, that opens something, that irreversibly shifts something. If you're not ready, if you're just curious, if you think you can watch this video and then continue as before, then press pause now. The button is in the bottom right. Nobody is forcing you. There's no pressure. But if you continue watching, if you let the next minutes into your consciousness, then the process has started. Then there's no going back. Then your old reality will begin to crumble. Slowly, perhaps, subtly, perhaps, but unstoppably. And you won't be able to pretend you didn't hear this, that you don't know this, that you're still the person you were before this moment. So the question is not whether you want to watch this video. The question is whether you're ready for what comes after. For the days when everything that was normal before suddenly seems foreign. For the moments when you wonder if you're going crazy because the world around you no longer makes sense. For the phase when you can't go back to what was, but haven't yet fully arrived at what will be. This is the price of activation. This is the price of expanded consciousness. And I can't tell you it will be easy. I can only tell you it's worth it. But only if you're truly ready. Are you ready? Or are you just curious? Because curiosity is not enough. Curiosity will bring you into a state where you have the information, but not the structure to integrate it. Where you see the truth, but don't have the strength to live with it. Where you're stuck between two worlds, unable to return, unable to go forward. That's hell. Not the activation itself, but activation without readiness, expansion without foundation, knowledge without the capacity to carry it. If you're still here, if you haven't paused, then I assume you've made your decision, consciously or unconsciously. And the fact that you're still listening means that a part of you already knows this is not random, that you weren't led here by algorithms, that something in you responded to this specific frequency, that your consciousness is already in the process of activation, even if your mind hasn't fully grasped it yet. And here's the first thing you need to understand. Consciousness doesn't work like knowledge. Knowledge you can forget. Knowledge you can ignore. Knowledge you can set aside and pick up later. But consciousness works differently. Consciousness is like a room that opens. And once this room is open, once you've walked through that door, you can't close the door again. You can't fit back into a smaller room. You can't pretend you didn't see what you saw. You can't unsee. That's why so many people unconsciously choose not to know. Why they close their eyes when truth comes too close. Why they cover their ears when information becomes too clear. Not because they're stupid, not because they're weak, but because they understand on a deep level that some information is irreversible, that some insights bring you into a reality from which there's no return, and that this reality, as liberating as it may be, is also frightening, because it questions everything, because it leaves nothing sacred, because it forces you to reconsider everything you held to be true. Perhaps you've already experienced this. Perhaps there were moments in your life when you realized something you could no longer unrealize. Something about yourself, something about someone you love, something about the world, and you tried to ignore it. You tried to pretend you didn't see it. You tried to return to the state of ignorance. But it didn't work, because the door was already open, because the room had already expanded, because your consciousness had already entered the new dimension. That's what I'm talking about, but on a much deeper level, because what I'm about to share with you is not just a single insight. It's a structural shift in the way you perceive reality. It's an activation of a part of your consciousness that was previously dormant. It's a recalibration of your entire perceptual matrix. And once this calibration has happened, once this part is activated, you can't go back to the old setting, to the old frequency, to the old blindness. Some people call this awakening. Others call it enlightenment. Still others simply call it going crazy. Because when reality begins to crumble, when what you held to be solid suddenly becomes permeable, when the boundaries between the possible and the impossible blur, then it feels like madness, especially when nobody around you sees the same thing. Especially when you try to talk about it and people look at you as if you've lost your mind. Especially when you yourself aren't sure whether you're awakening or breaking down. But here's the truth. Madness and awakening look the same at the beginning. Both break the old reality structure. Both make you see the world differently. Both isolate you from those who are still in the old frequency. The difference is not in the process. The difference is in the integration. Madness is expansion without structure. Awakening is expansion with consciousness. Madness is when you're flooded by the new reality. Awakening is when you learn to navigate in the new reality. And that's why I'm telling you that you need to be ready. Because the activation will come. The expansion will happen. But whether you experience this as liberation or as chaos depends on whether you have the structure to integrate it, whether you have the stability to carry it, whether you have the willingness to let go and simultaneously stay grounded. Most spiritual teachings don't prepare you for this. They speak of light and love, of unity and peace, of the wonderful transformation that awaits you. But they don't speak of the in-between phase, of the dark night of the soul, of the moment when you lose everything you held to be real and haven't yet found anything new to hold on to, of the time when you're floating in the void, uncertain whether you're falling or flying. This is the phase that breaks most people. Not the activation itself, but the in-between phase. The phase when the old is dying and the new hasn't yet been born. The phase when you're neither here nor there. The phase when all certainty has disappeared and nothing makes sense anymore. This is the phase you need to be ready for. because it will come. Once the activation begins, once your consciousness starts to expand, this phase is inevitable. But if you're ready, if you understand that this is part of the process, if you know that the darkness is not the end, but the transition, then you can go through. Then you can endure the void. Then you can wait until the new manifests. And then, on the other side, you'll arrive in a reality that's so much wider than anything you imagined, so much freer, so much more real, so much more alive. But there's no way there without going through the in-between phase. There's no way to expansion without leaving the old structure. There's no way to new consciousness without letting the old consciousness die. That's the price. That's the initiation. That's what it means to truly awaken. And now, after you know this, after you understand what's coming, if you continue watching, you have a choice. You can pause now. You can leave this video. You can stay in your current reality, in your current frequency, in your current comfort zone. That's completely legitimate. There's no pressure. There's no right or wrong. There's only ready or not ready. Or you can continue watching. You can allow the activation. You can walk through the door. You can begin the process. And then there's no going back. Then the seed is planted. Then the expansion will begin, slowly or quickly, subtly or intensely, but unstoppably. And your only task will be to learn how to deal with this new reality, how to live in this expanded frequency, how to become the person who can carry these insights. The decision is yours. I can only give you the information. I can only show you the door. But you must walk through yourself. And walking through means letting go, means trusting, means being ready to question everything you held to be true, ready to lose everything you held to be secure, ready to stand in the void without knowing what comes next. Are you ready? Truly ready? Then let's begin. Because what I'm about to show you will change your reality forever. Here's what most people don't understand. Activation is not an event, it's a process. And this process has already begun. Not now, not in this video, but long before you clicked on this title. The fact that you're here, the fact that these words have reached you, the fact that you haven't already paused, means the activation is already running in you. This video is not the trigger. This video is the confirmation of what's already in motion. Perhaps you've already noticed it. The small things, the moments when reality feels strange, not wrong, but permeable. As if it's made of thinner material than before. As if you could see through it if you only found the right angle. You may have ignored it. You may have rationalized it. You may have told yourself you're tired, that you're working too much, that you're imagining things. But deep inside, you knew something is different, that something is shifting, that you're no longer fully in the reality you grew up in. These are the first signs, the cracks in the matrix, the moments when consciousness begins to detach from consensual reality. And the more you awaken, the more your consciousness expands, the more frequent these moments become, until they're no longer moments, but your permanent state. Until you realize that the reality everyone else lives in is no longer real for you. Until you understand that you're operating in a different frequency, in a different dimension, in a different version of reality. And that's when the isolation begins. Not because you withdraw, but because nobody understands what you're talking about anymore. Because the conversations you used to have suddenly seem meaningless. Because the things everyone worries about seem completely irrelevant to you. Because you see that the people around you are living in a collective dream. And you can't go back into that dream. You can't pretend you're still asleep when you've already awakened. This is the price of activation that nobody talks about. Not the mystical experiences, not the expanded insights, not the moments of unity or peace, but the loneliness, the deep existential loneliness that comes when you realize you no longer belong to the species you were born into, that you've become a different kind of human, that you're living in a different reality, even though you're still in the same body, in the same world, with the same people. Perhaps you already feel this. Perhaps that's why you're here. Because you're looking for someone who understands. Because you're desperately searching for someone who also sees these cracks, who also feels this permeability, who also experiences this shift. And I tell you, you're not alone, but I also tell you that the number of those going through this is small, very small, and that you need to learn to deal with this isolation, that you need to learn to exist in both worlds simultaneously, in the world of others and in your own expanded reality. Scientists who research consciousness have discovered something fascinating. They've found that the human brain doesn't perceive reality as it is, but that it constructs reality based on expectations, based on beliefs, based on the frequency setting of consciousness. What you see is not what's there. What you see is what your consciousness interprets should be there. And when your consciousness changes, when your frequency shifts, then what you see also changes. Then reality itself changes. This is not philosophy. This is measurable physics. Quantum physicists call this the observer effect. The fact that the act of observation changes the observed reality. That there is no objective reality independent of the observer. That consciousness and matter are not separate but interwoven. That you're not living in a reality that exists independently of you, but that you're continuously creating the reality you experience through the way your consciousness is calibrated. And when this calibration changes, when the activation happens, when your consciousness jumps into a new frequency, then not only your perception changes, then the actual structure of what you experience as real changes. Other people will still see the old reality, because their calibration is still the old one. But you see something different. You experience something different. You literally live in a different reality, even if you're standing in the same room. This is why communication becomes so difficult. You speak of a reality they don't see. They speak of a reality that's no longer real for you. It's not that one of you is right and the other isn't. It's that you're operating in different frequency states, in different versions of reality, in different layers of what's possible. Consciousness researchers have conducted studies where they presented the same situations to people in different states of consciousness. And the results were astonishing. People in expanded states of consciousness perceived things that others didn't perceive, saw patterns that others didn't see, recognized connections that others didn't recognize, not because they were more intelligent, but because their perceptual filters were calibrated differently, because their consciousness had access to information that was closed to others. This is what activation means. Not that you become superhuman, but that you gain access to levels of reality that were previously invisible to you, that your perception expands, that your sensitivity increases, that you begin to see the structures that lie beneath the surface, the patterns that order the chaos, the connections that unite the separate, the frequencies that form matter. And once you see this, once this level becomes visible to you, you can't go back to the superficial view. You can't pretend the world is flat when you've once seen the depth. You can't live in the two-dimensional reality when you've once experienced the third, the fourth, the fifth dimension. Consciousness cannot shrink. It can only expand. And every expansion is permanent. But here's the problem. The society we live in is not constructed for expanded states of consciousness. It's constructed for the average, for consensual reality, for the shared hallucination we call normality. And when you begin to operate outside this normality, when you begin to see things others don't see, when you begin to function differently, the system will perceive you as a threat, not consciously, but unconsciously, and it will try to bring you back into the box, back into the norm, back into sleep. This happens through subtle social mechanisms, through the look of wonder when you say something outside what's accepted, through the gentle correction when you behave differently, through the silent isolation when you no longer fit the unspoken rules. It's not meant maliciously. People don't do it consciously. But the collective consciousness has a homeostasis mechanism. It wants stability. It wants predictability. It wants everyone to vibrate at the same frequency. And when you step out of this frequency, it will try to pull you back. Perhaps you've already experienced this. You tried to talk about your insights. You tried to share what you saw. And the reactions weren't curiosity, not interest, but discomfort, concern, perhaps even fear. Not because you sound crazy, but because you're questioning their reality, because you're threatening the illusion they live in, because you're forcing them to recognize that there's more than what they see. And most people don't want that. Most people want to stay in their comfortable reality, even if this reality is a lie. This is why you need to be careful about who you talk to, why you need to learn to speak two languages, the language of consensual reality and the language of your expanded perception, why you need to learn when to use which language, because if you constantly speak from your expanded reality to people who are still in the old frequency, you'll either be isolated or institutionalized. That's not exaggeration. That's history. That's what has always happened to those who were too far ahead, who saw too much, who spoke too loud. So you learn to be silent, not out of cowardice, but out of wisdom. You learn to keep your insights to yourself. You learn to navigate in both worlds. You learn to appear outwardly normal, while inwardly operating in a completely different reality. This is not deception. This is survival. This is the way you function in a world that's not yet ready for what you've become. But the isolation remains. The deep longing for someone who understands. The longing for real connection with someone who also sees this expanded reality. The longing for a conversation that goes beyond the surface. For an encounter that's real. For someone who doesn't just hear your words, but feels your frequency. And sometimes you find these people. Rarely. But they exist. Others who have also gone through the activation. Who also see the cracks. Who also live in both worlds. And when you meet, when your frequencies recognize each other, then something magical happens. Then it feels like coming home. Like finally being seen. Like no longer having to be alone with what you know. This is one of the few rewards, one of the few points of light in the isolation. The moments when you meet someone who is also awake, who also sees, who also understands. These encounters are rare, but they're precious. They're the oases in the desert. They're the confirmation that you're not crazy, that what you see is real, that there are others who are also making this journey. I remember such a moment. It was a few years ago. I was in the middle of what I now understand as my activation phase. Reality was crumbling. Nothing made sense anymore. I had nobody I could talk to, nobody who would have understood, and I began to doubt whether I was losing my mind. And then I had a dream, a very vivid, very specific dream. In this dream, I saw a phone number. No voice told me what to do. No message explained the meaning. Just this number, clear, distinct, persistent. And when I woke up, the number was still in my head, every digit, perfectly remembered. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it's just a dream. It means nothing. But the number didn't go away. It stayed in my head, day after day, until I finally gave in. Until I thought, okay, I'll call this number, just to prove it's nonsense, just to show my mind that dreams are just dreams. I took my phone. I typed in the number. My heart beat faster than it should. My hands trembled slightly. I pressed call. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. And then someone answered. A voice, male, confused. He said, "Hello?" And I froze, because I suddenly had no idea what to say. What do I say? Sorry, I saw you in a dream. I stood there with the phone to my ear, silent, and felt like an idiot. He said it again. "Hello? Is anyone there?" And I forced myself to speak. I said, "Sorry, I think I dialed the wrong number." I wanted to hang up. That was it. That was my big mystical experiment. A mistake. Proof that I'm really imagining everything. But then he said something that stopped me. He said, "Wait, what number were you actually trying to call?" And I, without thinking, told him the number from the dream. And there was a pause, a long pause, and then he said, "That's interesting. That's my old number. I changed it 3 months ago." My mind tried to process what that meant, but before I could say anything, he continued. He said, "Why are you calling a number that no longer exists?" And I, completely honest now because I had nothing left to lose, said, "Because I saw it in a dream, and I expected him to hang up, that he would think I'm crazy, that the conversation would end here." But instead he laughed, not mockingly, but recognizing, and he said, "Of course you did. That's exactly how it works." And then, without me asking, he began to speak about consciousness, about activation, about the phase I was going through, about the cracks in reality, about the isolation, about everything I was experiencing, but couldn't explain to anyone. We talked for 2 hours, and in those 2 hours I understood more about what was happening to me than in the months before. Not because he told me something new, but because he confirmed what I already knew, because he had words for what I felt, because he showed me I wasn't alone, that what I was going through was a process, a known process, a process that others before me had gone through. And at the end of the conversation, he said something I've never forgotten. He said, "You didn't call me by accident. There are no random connections in this process. You received the information you needed in the form you could receive, as a number, because your mind could accept a number. Someone else would have received a name, or an address, or a symbol, but you received a number, and you had the courage to use it. That's the sign that you're ready." That was years ago, and I've never spoken to that person again. I never tried to contact them again. Because I understood that wasn't the point. The point wasn't the person. The point was the message. The message that the universe speaks to you, that the quantum field communicates, that information comes to you in ways your rational mind can't foresee, and that when you learn to trust these paths, when you learn to speak this language, doors open that you didn't know existed. This is one of the aspects of activation that nobody talks about. The synchronicities, the impossible connections, the moments when reality arranges itself so that you receive exactly the information you need, exactly when you need it, in a way that's statistically impossible. This doesn't happen sometimes. This happens constantly. Once the activation begins, once your consciousness enters the new frequency, this becomes your normal experience. But here's what most people don't understand. These synchronicities don't happen to entertain you. They don't happen to show you how special you are. They happen to guide you, to navigate you in the right direction, to show you what the next step is. And when you learn to pay attention to them, when you learn to follow them, your life becomes a continuous unfolding of possibilities that were previously closed. But this requires something. This requires trust, not blind trust, but informed trust. The trust that comes when you experience again and again that these seemingly random events actually bring you to the right places, to the right people, to the right information, and that when you follow this flow, when you stop fighting and start surrendering, life becomes easier. Not simpler, but easier. Because you're no longer swimming against the current. Because you're working with the field, not against it. And now I want you to do something. Something very simple but very powerful. Close your eyes for a moment. Breathe deeply. And ask yourself, what is the one piece of information I need most right now? Don't ask the question to your mind. Ask it to the field, to the consciousness that's larger than you. And then wait, not for an answer in words, but for a feeling, for an impulse, for a sense. It could be an image, it could be a sensation, it could be a word that appears in your head. Perceive it. Don't judge it. Don't analyze it. Just take note of it. 30 seconds. Then open your eyes again. Whatever you just perceived, whether it made sense or not, whether it was clear or vague, that was your first conscious communication with the field. That was your first experience of receiving information directly from a source that's not your rational mind. And the more you practice this, the more you learn to speak this language, the clearer the answers become. The more precise the guidance becomes, the more obvious the connection between your consciousness and the larger field that surrounds us all becomes. But here's what's important. You must act on this information, not immediately, not blindly, but when the same information comes again, in a different form, at a different time, then that's not coincidence, that's confirmation. That's the field showing you this is important, that this is the way, and then you must have the courage to follow, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it seems irrational, even if everyone around you says you're crazy. This is the difference between those who experience activation as chaos and those who experience it as liberation, not the activation itself, but the willingness to follow the guidance, the willingness to trust the unknown, the willingness to let go of control and instead go with the flow. And now we come to the core of why you're here, to the actual protocol, to the method of how you deal with this activation, how you navigate through the phase when everything collapses, how you maintain structure while the old reality crumbles, how you build the new reality while the old dies. The first step is acceptance, not resignation, but genuine acceptance of what's happening. The acceptance that your old reality is dying, that the person you were no longer exists, that the life you knew is over. This sounds dramatic, this sounds dark, but it's necessary. Because as long as you try to hold on to the old, as long as you try to return to what was, you'll be torn between two worlds. You'll be neither here nor there. You'll be in a constant state of resistance that exhausts and paralyzes you. Acceptance means letting go, means saying, yes, this is dying, and that's okay. Means grieving when grief is necessary. Means feeling what needs to be felt, but not dwelling in it, not getting stuck in it, but feeling through it and then moving on. Because on the other side of death is birth. On the other side of collapse is new beginning. On the other side of the void is infinite possibility. The second step is grounding. And this is perhaps the most important step of all. Because while your consciousness expands, while your perception extends into other dimensions, you need something that keeps you here. Something that binds you to physical reality. Something that prevents you from completely drifting into the expanded states and losing contact with the material world. Grounding means your body, your senses, your physical presence. It means eating, even if you don't feel hungry. It means sleeping, even if your mind is active. It means moving, even if you'd rather stay in meditation. It means doing the simple, everyday, physical things that signal to your system that you're still here, that you still have a body, that you're still part of this world, even if you simultaneously have access to other worlds. Most people who get lost in the activation phase, who slip into psychosis, who completely lose contact with consensual reality, don't do so because the activation was too strong. They do so because they neglected grounding, because they were so fascinated by the expanded states that they forgot to honor their body, that they stopped fulfilling physical needs, that they lost the anchor that keeps them here. So no matter how expanded your consciousness becomes, no matter how deep your insights go, no matter how intense your experiences are, stay in your body. Stay grounded. Stay here. This is not limitation. This is safety. This is the difference between controlled expansion and chaotic collapse. The third step is discernment, the ability to distinguish between what's real and what's projection, between what comes from the field and what comes from your own mind, between genuine guidance and wishful thinking. This is difficult, especially at the beginning, because in the activation phase, the boundaries blur, and it's not always clear what's what. But here's a rule that helps. Real information from the field feels neutral. It has no emotional charge. It's simply there. Clear, precise, without drama. Projection, on the other hand, is emotional. It's what you want to hear. It's what confirms your ego. It's what feeds your fears or fulfills your wishes. And when you learn to feel this difference, when you learn to recognize the quality of information, you'll be misled less often. The fourth step is integration, and this is the step most people skip. They have the experience, they have the insight, they have the moment of clarity, but then they move on to the next experience, to the next insight, to the next moment, without ever pausing to integrate what just happened, without absorbing it into their system. without letting it become part of their new reality. Integration means time, means silence, means reflection, means taking the insights and moving them through your body, feeling them, digesting them, absorbing them, until they're no longer something you know, but something you are. Until they're no longer an idea in your head, but an embodiment in your being. And this doesn't happen quickly. This doesn't happen through thinking once. This happens through repeated returning, through revisiting the insight, through feeling in different contexts, through applying in different situations, until it's anchored so deeply that it becomes automatic, until it's integrated so completely that you no longer have to think about it. The fifth and final step is expression, because activation is not just for you. Activation happens through you for the collective. You're not randomly the one who awakens. You're not randomly the one who sees this expanded reality. You are activated because you have a role, because you're supposed to contribute something, because something is supposed to come into the world through you that isn't here yet. And expression doesn't mean you have to become a spiritual teacher, doesn't mean you have to write a book, doesn't mean you have to stand on a stage. Expression simply means you live the new frequency, that you embody the expanded reality, that you show through your being what's possible. And that alone, the simple being in your new frequency, will touch others, will activate others, will wake others up. You don't have to preach. You don't have to convince. You don't have to explain. You just have to be. And the right people will feel your frequency, will be drawn to you, will feel their own activation in your presence. This is the ripple effect. This is why you're going through this process, not just for you, but for everyone who comes after. But I must be honest with you, this process will test you, not because the universe is cruel, but because every real transformation goes through fire, because every true change must go through resistance, because the only way to know if you're truly ready is to expose yourself to situations where you must choose. Old frequency or new, old identity or new, old reality or new. The tests won't be announced. They won't come with a sign that says, "Attention, this is now an exam." They'll come as life, as seemingly normal situations, as moments when you stand before a choice, and only you know this choice means more than it seems, that this choice defines whether you stay in your new frequency or fall back into the old. Perhaps it's a situation at work. Someone behaves exactly as would have activated your old triggers before. Your old reaction would have been anger, or defense, or withdrawal. And in this moment, you have a choice. You can choose the old reaction that's familiar, that comes automatically, that your system knows. Or you can choose the new reaction that comes from your expanded frequency, that's conscious, that requires you to stay present in the discomfort. Or perhaps it's a relationship, someone who wants to pull you back into the old dynamic, into the old version of you that they know, that they understand, that's familiar to them. And they don't do it maliciously. They do it because your change unsettles them, because your new frequency questions their reality, because they want you back the way you were, because that was safer for them. And you must decide, do you stay in your new frequency, even if it means the relationship must change or end? Or do you go back to preserve the peace, to save the connection, to not be alone? These are the tests, and they will come, again and again, especially at the beginning, especially in the first weeks and months after activation. because your old system will fight. Your old patterns will try to pull you back. Your old fears will become loud, and each time you'll stand before the same choice: old frequency or new, step back or forward, sleep or wakefulness. And here's what nobody tells you: you'll sometimes fail, you'll sometimes fall back, you'll sometimes choose the old reaction, even though you know the new one would be better. This is not failure. This is part of the process. This is how integration works, not in a straight line, but in waves: 2 steps forward, 1 back, 3 steps forward, 2 back. But always a net movement forward, as long as you don't give up. The difference between those who complete the activation and those who fall back into sleep is not that the successful ones never fail, but that they always come back, that after every relapse they get back up, that after every old reaction they forgive themselves and choose the new frequency again, that they understand this is a marathon, not a sprint, that this is a recalibration of your entire being that takes time, that takes patience, that takes dedication. And here's something that might surprise you. The stronger the resistance becomes, the more intense the tests come, the more difficult it feels, the closer you are to the breakthrough. Because the old system doesn't fight when you're not a threat. It only fights when you're really changing something, when you're really stepping out of the old frequency, when you're really becoming a different version of you. So when things get difficult, when resistance increases, when you feel like everything is collapsing, then you know you're on the right path. Then you know the activation is working. Then you know you're not stagnating, but moving. And your only task in these moments is to hold on, is to hold the new frequency, even when everything in you wants to return to the old, is to stay present, even when it would be easier to dissociate. I remember the darkest phase of my own activation. It was about 3 months after I made that call, after I began to understand what was happening to me. And for a while, it felt like liberation, like finally making sense, like finally understanding. But then came the counter-movement, and it came hard. Suddenly, everything in my life seemed to fall apart. Relationships broke. My job felt unbearable. My entire life that I'd built seemed to dissolve, and I didn't know if this was part of the process or if I was simply doing everything wrong, whether I was awakening or breaking down, whether I was being liberated or ruining my life. There were nights when I thought I should stop, go back, try to put the old together again, try to be the person I was before, because at least life was stable then. At least I knew where I stood then. At least I had people around me then, even if the connections were superficial. But I couldn't go back, not because I didn't want to, but because it was physically impossible, because the door was already closed, because consciousness had already expanded, because I had seen things I could no longer unsee. And so I had only one option: keep going, through the darkness, through the uncertainty, through the complete dissolution of what I had held to be my life. And then, one day, without me being able to say exactly when or how, I noticed I was on the other side, that the darkness had lifted, that a new life had begun to form, not the old life repaired, but a completely new life, with new people, with new work, with a new way of being. And I realized that everything that had collapsed had to collapse, because it didn't fit my new frequency, because it was part of the old reality, because it had to go to make room for the new. This is what you need to understand. When things collapse, when your life seems to dissolve, when everything you held to be stable suddenly becomes unstable. This is not the sign that you're making a mistake. This is the sign that the activation is working, that the old reality is dying, that space is being made for the new. And your task is not to save the old. Your task is to let go and trust that on the other side of the collapse, something better is waiting. But this requires courage. This requires trust. This requires the ability to stand in the void without knowing what comes next. And not everyone has that. Not everyone is ready for this. And that's okay. There's no guilt in not being ready. There's no shame in saying, not now, maybe later, because the activation will come back. The window will open again, perhaps in a month, perhaps in a year, perhaps in this life, perhaps in the next. But it will come back, because that's the nature of consciousness. It wants to expand. It wants to awaken. It never stops calling. But if you're here now, if you've listened to this point, if you're still here despite everything I've said, then that's a sign. Then that's the confirmation that you're ready. Not because you're perfect, not because you have no fear, but because you're ready to keep going despite the fear. Because you're ready to let go, even if you don't know what's coming. Because you're ready to trust, even when every instinct in you says, hold on, control, plan. And if that applies to you, then I want to ask you something. Think back to my story with the phone, to the moment when I had the courage to dial that number, even though my mind said this is crazy. Was there a moment in your life when you did something that made no rational sense, but felt right? A moment when you followed your intuition, even though everything spoke against it? If yes, write it in the comments. Not the whole story, just a few words. What was your leap into the unknown? What was your moment of irrational trust? This is important, not for me, but for you. Because when you write it down, you make a commitment. You tell the field, I recognize these moments. I honor these decisions. I'm ready to have more of them. And while you do that, I want you to understand something. This channel doesn't exist to entertain you. This channel exists to activate you. Every video I make carries a specific frequency, specific information, specific alignment. And if you stay here, if you subscribe, if you watch regularly, then you're making a statement. Not to me, to yourself. You're saying, I'm ready to continuously immerse myself in this frequency. I'm ready to regularly remind myself of who I truly am. I'm ready to be part of a community that's also awakening. Because here's the truth. You can go through this process alone. But it's easier with others. It's lighter when you have people who understand, who also see, who also go through. This doesn't replace your own work. This doesn't replace your own integration. But it gives you a net. It gives you confirmation. It gives you the certainty that you're not alone when the darkness comes. So if these words have moved something in you, if they've activated a frequency in you, then subscribe. Not out of politeness, but out of commitment. Out of the decision that you're ready to walk this path. That you're ready to continuously immerse yourself in this frequency. That you're ready to be part of something that's bigger than you. And activate the bell. Because what comes next will be even more direct, even more powerful, even more challenging. I'm going to speak about something most people don't want to hear, about the bridge between your current reality and the reality you desire, about the reason why this bridge is always open, but most never see it, about what it really takes to switch from one timeline to another. But that's nothing for the curious. That's only for those who are truly ready to fundamentally shift their reality. So make sure you're notified. Make sure you don't miss it when this video appears, because it won't stay open long. It won't be accessible to everyone. It will only be for those who are in the right frequency, at the right time, in the right place. And if you're here, if you hear this, if you feel this, then you're probably one of these people. The activation has begun. Whether you notice it or not, whether you accept it or not, the process started the moment you clicked on this video. The moment you decided to let these words into your consciousness. And now there's only one question. Will you embrace the process? Will you go through the darkness? Will you pass the tests? Will you hold the new frequency, even when everything in you wants to return to the old? The answer doesn't lie in this video. It lies in the next days, in the next weeks, in the next months, in the decisions you make when nobody is watching, in the moments when you stand before the choice between old and new, in the situations where you must decide who you really want to be. You know, there's a moment in every activation when you realize there's no going back. Not because you don't want to go back, not because you can't go back, but because the person who would go back no longer exists. Because the consciousness that would make that choice is already transformed. Because you no longer fit into the old life, even if you tried. This is the moment of true freedom. Not when you choose to leave, but when you realize the choice has already been made. That it was made long before your conscious mind understood it. That it was made the moment your consciousness responded to this frequency. The moment you clicked on this title. The moment you decided to continue watching, even after I warned you. That was the moment. That was the decision. Everything after is just the unfolding of what was already set in motion. And you can fight against it. You can try to stop it. You can try to return to what was. But you'll find it's like swimming against a current, like running against the wind, like trying to push water uphill, possible perhaps for a short time, but exhausting and ultimately pointless. Or you can let go. You can stop fighting. You can surrender to the flow and see where it carries you. And this is not resignation. This is not giving up. This is trust. This is wisdom. This is understanding that there are forces larger than your individual will, that there are currents stronger than your control, that there's a process unfolding through you, not by you. I know this is frightening. I know it feels like loss of control. I know every instinct in you says, hold on, plan, secure yourself. But here's the truth. The control you had was always an illusion. The security you felt was always a construction. The stability you relied on was always just an agreement that we all pretend things are solid when they're actually in constant flux. The activation shows you this. It shows you that nothing is solid, that everything is in motion, that reality is malleable, fluid, permeable, and that once you see this, you can never again live in the illusion of solidity, never again in the fiction of control, never again in the dream of security. And this is simultaneously the most frightening and the most liberating thing that can happen to you. Frightening because it means there's no solid ground under your feet. Liberating because it means you're not limited by what is. That you're not trapped in a fixed reality. that you actually have the power not just to shift your perception, but the structure of what you experience. This is the gift of activation, not the mystical experiences, although those will come, not the expanded abilities, although those will develop, but the deep knowing that you're not a victim of reality, that you're not trapped in circumstances, that you're not limited by what seems possible, but that you're an active participant, a co-creator, someone who can actually shift the frequency they operate on, and thereby change the reality they experience. But with this power comes responsibility. The responsibility to understand that every choice you make has consequences, that every frequency you radiate creates resonances, that every thought, every feeling, every action influences the field, not just for you, but for everyone around you. You're no longer isolated. You're no longer separate. You're part of a larger consciousness that expresses itself through you. And this means your development is not just your own, that your healing is not just for you, that your transformation has impacts that go far beyond your individual existence. You become a node, a transmission point, a place where the higher frequency enters the material world. And this is not ego. This is not delusion of grandeur. This is simply the physics of how consciousness fields work. Everyone who awakens makes it a bit easier for the next. Everyone who holds the frequency makes it a bit more stable for others. Everyone who goes through the darkness and arrives on the other side shows the way for those who follow. This is why you're doing this, not just for you, but for the collective, for the species, for the evolution of consciousness itself. Does this sound big? Does this sound overwhelming? Good. Because it is big, it is overwhelming. This is not some spiritual hobby. This is not some self-improvement project. This is the fundamental transformation of what it means to be human. This is the transition from an unconscious to a conscious species. This is the moment when humanity begins to wake up. And you're part of the first wave, not because you did something special, not because you deserved it, but because your consciousness in this cycle, in this time, in this incarnation, was ready. Because something in you responded to the call. Because you said yes, even if you didn't fully understand what you were saying yes to. And now that the process has begun, now that the activation is running, now that the seeds are planted, your only task is to trust that what's unfolding is unfolding correctly, to trust that the darkness is part of the process, to trust that the collapse is necessary for the new beginning, to trust that on the other side something is waiting that's so much bigger than anything you can imagine. I can't tell you how long it will take. I can't tell you what it will look like for you. I can't tell you which specific challenges you'll go through, because every path is unique. Every activation is individual. Every process has its own timing, its own rhythm, its own dynamic. But I can tell you it's worth it. I can tell you you're not alone. I can tell you that thousands before you have walked this path, that thousands beside you are walking it now, that thousands after you will walk it, and that we're all connected to each other through this frequency, through this experience, through this collective awakening. You're part of something bigger than you, and simultaneously, you're essential. Your specific frequency, your unique perspective, your individual contribution. The collective needs you. Not any version of you, but exactly you, with all your wounds, with all your strengths, with everything you are and everything you're becoming. The activation cannot be undone. I said that at the beginning, and that's still true. That will always be true. Once consciousness has expanded, once the door has been opened, once the frequency has shifted, there's no going back. Only forward, only through, only into the expansion. And perhaps you already feel this. Perhaps you sense that something in you has shifted just through hearing these words. Perhaps you notice that your reality already feels different. Perhaps you see the first cracks, the first signs, the first hints that the old structure is no longer as solid as it was. This is good. This is right. This is the beginning. And from here, there's only one way. Deeper in, further in, more complete in, into the activation, into the awakening, into the new reality that's already waiting for you. You've made the choice. You've said yes. You've agreed to walk through this door. Perhaps you didn't fully know what you were getting into. Perhaps you only now understand what this really means. But the decision is made. The process is running. The activation cannot be undone. And this is not threat. This is promise. The promise that you won't be left behind in the old reality. That you won't get stuck between the worlds. That you will go through. That you will arrive. That you'll meet a version of you on the other side that's so much further than you can imagine now. This is the gift. This is the grace. This is what you were ready for, even if you didn't know it. The activation cannot be undone. And that's the best thing that could ever happen to you. Welcome to the other side of the door. The path lies before you, and you're not walking alone.